So this week, Sasha, you felt like the headline to talk about is that there is a new king in AI. It's called Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro experimental, and it finally beat OpenAI 4o at a key benchmark. And I am not surprised because it looks like we are like in WWE wrestling match, and it's like drama and it's unfolding. So you're gonna tell us about that today. Welcome to the Headline AI podcast, where we unpack the latest AI news and the trends through a VC lens. And today we're talking about this headline: Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro dethrones GPT-4o. And this is based on a benchmark called the Limsys Chatbot Arena. It's like a human style evaluation, and they get to score them kind of like an SAT. It's actually based on Chess Elo, which is like a scoring system. But here's the scores: Gemini 1.5 Pro experimental, 1300, GPT-4o 1286, GPT-4o mini not too far behind, 1280, and then my favorite Claude 3.5 Sonnet at 1271. So these are the benchmarks. It was released this week. Why is this important, Sasha?
Yeah, it reflects that Google's leading the pack, and the model has gotten to a point where, based on human evaluation in an A/B test scenario, that's essentially what this chatbot arena is, where Google's reached what we call the state of the art, and it really is leading the pack in terms of the responses to the prompts that are being provided. So that's a really impressive win, especially considering that they were trailing for the longest period, but they've essentially caught up by the looks of it.
Can you maybe just take a step back and explain to people, and I needed to learn this too, what do you mean when a LLM or an AI is being benchmarked?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that you can evaluate how LLM is performing. There's automated benchmarks, and there's a number of them to evaluate all of the different places where it could be, again, state of the art. Everything from its ability to do coding, mathematics, language. And then there's the human eval, which is really like testing real world questions with humans choosing the answers. So it's a little bit trickier to manipulate. And then there's a third category, which is emerging, which is harder questions. And that's really distilling down a lot of the human eval questions into 500 even more difficult prompts. And what that really helps differentiate is the reasoning capability. So all of these models have different capabilities, and we're trying to essentially, or the industry is really trying to find different ways to make sure that they can actually evaluate which one is the state of the art. And the reason that the state of the art is really important because it helps you identify and track where the frontier is at. And then usually by knowing where the frontier is at, you can usually say, well, the rate limiting step or the reason the model isn't performing any better is because of X. And then that allows you to identify areas for further research and to understand like what areas you can kind of like use as workarounds to try and improve the models more.
So just my understanding is that there are some benchmarks that are like SAT questions. It's like reading comprehension, and you should just be able to choose A, B, C, D, or like there's a multiple choice, right? And the LLMs literally will respond A, B, C, or D, or E. But you're saying there's benchmarks that are different. They are more reasoning type of benchmarks. But is there still a multiple choice that it has to pick from based on the type of question it is?
Yeah, there are, and they're actually they used to provide 4 multiple choice answers sometimes. Now they're actually finding, wait, we need to make sure that we are providing more multiple choice answers. So for example, 10 answers, to make sure that these models sometimes aren't just getting lucky, because the whole point of this is to differentiate the models and to understand which ones really are performing better than others. And if you only provide 4 answers, if you just guess randomly, you should get something like 25%. And that's 25% of differentiation that's lost then. So really it comes down to how can you craft the exercise. And human beings actually have to do this every single day. We're always given these very complex tasks, and we're always expected to perform with very nebulous goalposts. And that's really what we're trying to navigate now for a lot of these LLMs as well.
And taking a step back, I suspect next week we're going to have another episode about yet another LLM beating this one and at this benchmark. I mean, this is like CPU wars, like who has the faster CPU? And then someone's going to say GPUs or multiple processors, about nanometers and fabrication and heat and power and energy. Like, where's this going with all of these benchmarks? Because it seems like every week there's something new, another king of the hill.
Yeah, it's a great question. And really, it is a very complicated answer because it depends on everything from the use case through to things like the hardware. And it really comes down to which of the ecosystems and which of the models and which of the hardware ecosystems, play nice with each other and create these symbiotic, ecosystems. And really, I think there will be multiple winners for multiple different categories. And the fact that all these benchmarks are emerging shows just the incredible diversity of tasks and requirements. So, as much as we're going down the pathway of building these generalist models, sometimes you need super low latency models. Sometimes you need, models that take 3 months to think and solve specific problems. And the reality is, a lot of this really reflects a lot of the human style mechanisms that we've got in society. You've got, even in your brain, you've got the limbic system, which is fight or flight, which is, you can picture as like a very small model that allows you to react to specific circumstances very quickly. And then you've got your prefrontal cortex that allows you to think very slowly. It's very energy intensive and those sorts of things. There's a lot of parallels here, in a lot of the architectures, the models, and the benchmarks. So I think that's the kind of best analogy here.
Okay. So the second headline we're going to chat about is Google again. They purchased, or they acquired, the talent and the tech behind Character.ai. The founders of Character.ai actually used to work for Google. They're one of the key pioneers of the transformer model that they published while they're at Google. And now, after launching Character.ai, they're back at Google. And now, why is Google acquiring Character.ai so important?
The reason for this is, if you think about what software represents conceptually, because software ends up being this amalgamation, it's this middle of the road that represents hundreds or thousands of people that use it. And what Character AI is representing is almost is the complete opposite of that. It's like highly personalized experiences and highly personalized communication. And the way this manifests in our day-to-day life is, you have different friends with different personalities, and certain people resonate with you more than others. And really what this ends up being is like a very, very powerful personalization engine, so that when your LLM and your agent is speaking to you in the future, it's characterized in the way that you like it. It's speaking to you, it's in the way that you like, in the cadence that you like, in the language that you like. And it ends up actually being the way that you want to engage.
So you're not saying this is like Google trying to impersonate Captain Marvel and you can talk to your Captain Marvel, but this is actually the way for them to gain data about who you like talking to or your preference. Like you were mentioning last episode, it's all about the cookie problem, the personalization around AI. So character AI is just a channel to get to that, which is a lot more important than whether Dumbledore can express himself accurately on an LLM.
Exactly. And you think about it, OpenAI actually has a very interesting B2C motion, like a business to consumer motion here, where they can essentially speak to 100 million people and they can tailor their responses to the individual person. They've got that flywheel. Google doesn't quite have as much distribution here, and they probably end up finding themselves, again, going back to, let's say, advertising, making sure that they have these flywheels that allow them to understand, hey, what information and how it's presented, and making sure that they understand that very, very down to the consumer level ends up being actually really important. And it's actually having the reinforcement learning through human feedback that actually allows them to build some of these highly personalized experiences. So in my mind, this actually ends up being like, the whole partnership with Character.ai and bringing Noam in is actually bringing a lot of that talent in and knowing how to build a lot of those loops back into create highly personalized experiences.
The next headline today, one I'm very excited about, is Groq. Groq, who is the creator of the Tensor streaming processor. It's a chip company that raised $640 million in a Series D led by Cisco Investments, Samsung Catalyst, and BlackRock private equity. And personally, I am a huge fan of Groq. It basically is like another order of magnitude faster than all the LLMs when it comes to speed. There is some controversy whether, like, how much is it truly representing maybe the Llama 3 model, but it is fast. And it reminds me of when Jeff Bezos was doing the Alexa agent. He just demanded that this thing responds within milliseconds of the request, because anything that's delayed, it just feels artificial. And I think that was the insight. Alexa was, prior to LLMs, was the foremost AI sort of consumer product that people used because it was able to respond so quickly. And then the faster you respond, the more you can express for your next question, and therefore it becomes a little bit more part of your life. So Groq is pretty amazing. I use it pretty much daily. But what's your thoughts on the fundraise for them?
I mean, not surprised at all. I think Nvidia reaching a $3 trillion market cap has kind of redefined what hardware companies and what licensing companies can achieve. And if you think about the actual architecture and going back, like to what we're talking about, like the models have to work in this symbiotic way with the architecture. GPUs were never actually really designed for this application. So when Groq comes out and says it's orders of magnitude faster, more efficient, and better for inference, it's actually kind of not that surprising because GPUs were never actually built specifically for this purpose. They just happened to be capable of matrix multiplication. And I totally agree. When it comes to latency, having those organic experiences, and there are some really compelling demos popping up. And Meta, Groq, and Daily published a demo. If you Google it, it's the RTVI live demo and standards for voice. It's super impressive.
What is that? What does that demo look like?
Essentially, the demo is a conversation with an LLM. And it's real time, and it can actually sense when you're trying to interrupt it, and when you stop talking, it responds. And all of these natural components that you kind of expect speaking to a human being, and it really shows you what the frontier here and how quickly it is moving. Because just 6 months ago, these models weren't really even communicating with us in a voice fashion, and here we are now, and it is almost human-like. So I think a lot of the assumptions around the models and the capabilities and here are kind of going to be redefined pretty quickly.
Yeah, I saw that. Now I remember. They basically took really quick an API from 11 Labs, connected it to Groq, and then it could detect a pause, and then it would send it through the API, and it would just reply to you. And the guy was just talking, like, "What's the weather today?" And they'll just reply, and then okay, and then you ask your follow-up question and just reply, and you really see the conversation chat, the context building up throughout the conversation. It was like, oh my goodness, it was one of those it's coming days. Okay, next headline. This one's interesting. It's going to take kind of a shift into safety. So Argentina, the president of Argentina decided to launch an AI security unit, right? So AI safety, ethics. They're raising concerns about potential human rights violations. The Ministry of Security says that the unit will use AI to predict crimes and monitor social media. Reminds me of Minority Report with Tom Cruise. So what is up with this?
I'd say the reality here and why I like this story is it's kind of a refresher on the alignment, observability, safety. All of these topics are going to be super important. As we unlock all of these capabilities, we're almost going to have to find ways to make sure that the controls at a society, national, international level, that we actually have those to make sure that these don't get used for nefarious reasons. But in reality, actually, this is probably something that most governments are already doing, but you'll be hard pressed to get any tangible evidence of it or strong indicators of how and what they do. But the interesting thing here is I've actually spoken to a number of founders in the last year that actually, their training ground was actually this space in terms of image and facial recognition, looking at broad data sets to identify fraud activity. These actually ended up being fantastic training grounds for a lot of the founders who are now gone off and developed consumer grade apps. But I suspect that this is actually going to become more and more common, and that society will need to make sure and hold a lot of the companies that are providing these services and governments to a reasonably high standard to make sure that it doesn't go amiss.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this entire thing, and although here in the U.S. we have these conversations around security and safety, I also feel like it all takes one bad actor, not in our United States legal system, to kind of push the edge, and then it almost pulls the tension towards having to just keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, right? And so it's really tricky. I mean, as a country, I think we are having that red alert. We need to think about this, and thankfully, all of the AI leaders are saying that alignment. That's even the term now that's now thrown around is pretty important. But I'm worrying about an international agreement on it, which might be a lot harder to come by.
Yeah, and I think it's in the same way that trust and safety and some of the concerns around how the algorithms are swaying the general populace on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is kind of something that you could look at and say, like, there are some of these other tools that are emerging, and the emergence of deep fakes, and it's all over, especially leading up into an election, the risks here. So a lot of these AI houses are very justified in saying, hey, there are huge risks, and saying, hey, we're going to do a limited release of this technology for X months. And I suspect that we're going to see more and more headlines like this, and you're also going to see more and more headlines around observability, safety, and alignment as well.
All right, man. Well, you keep those headlines flowing into this podcast, and we'll keep recording these. So thanks again, Sasha. Have a good week, man.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Yep.